Independent inspectors this year, things like 11 out of 12 constables uncontested doesn't look very good, does it? But they're going to report on that. I don't know what effect that report will be, but presumably they will not leave it go unremarked upon, will they?
No. I'm sure that's right. If I can just go back to what was being said before about the constables being paid, if a constable becomes a minister, and if what I said before that ministers are recognised by having more money, I would find it perfectly acceptable that the constable who becomes a minister has a ministerial allowance as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my own feeling is that the constables ought to form a proper little sub-government of parishes. With their regular meetings, there are 12, and there's one, I mean, it's very convenient, there's 12. Every month they can be a different parish, they can have an agenda, the public can participate, and they can deal with lots of things which bung up the states, couldn't they? That's always my view about it.
Yes.
Make the whole thing much more efficient.
Well, you'd have to have a different division of powers and responsibilities to achieve that, because the trend over recent years, of course, has been to take things away from a parish. I mean, particularly, obviously, income support is the classic example.
But they want things like planning control back again, don't they? And who shall live in their parish. They want to be able to say what houses should be let to whom and all that sort of thing. So they're trying to...
I don't think I've heard any great drive in that direction, and I would certainly oppose it if that were to be the case.
Well, some of the parishes are worried they want to, like the gateway, they don't want to operate the housing gateway. They want to be able to choose who goes there and so on, because, to a large extent, they're worried about the voluntary system failing. They want people of the parish with a parish rule because they can't get volunteers. So they don't want people without a pedigree. But as we started off by saying, I've yet to find these parish families which are so involved in the parish routine. I mean, it's obviously very few, but there are some. It keeps going.
Oh, there are some, actually, yes. I mean, it was very much associated with the agricultural community, and obviously, like everything in Jersey, as that community has declined, so things have changed.
You've touched upon agriculture because that's a subject which is, and there's a lot of green land out there. Is it sustainable to have green land priority for agriculture with so many other demands on it? Do you have a view on it?
Yes, I think you have to have it as the priority. That doesn't mean to say that it's completely impossible to put anything on green land, but it must be the priority. The green land, the farming land and the coastline, it's the background against which everybody lives out their lives. And I think to not want to preserve that would be absolutely foolhardy.
Can we afford to keep it as it's like a tourist attraction? That's what they call it. The tourists come to take pictures of Jersey cows. Well, it's an expensive tourist attraction, isn't it? Really?
I mean, I've obviously read you over the years where you've characterised it as the wrong use of green land, and that cows are not necessarily the best use and so forth. But I do agree with Pierre. But of course you have to address the fundamental issue, which is ever and is utterly unresolved and has been a complete policy failure of the government, its population. We have failed to grasp that nettle. We inherited a system of short-term single permits which was meant to support the hospitality and agricultural industries and latterly the retail industry, and we've never been able to shake that off, basically. And we've got this, or we had, this improbable situation where people who came in, for example, to seek IT work were put through the hopper much more rigorously than people who had come in to work in these industries and then at the 5-year point move into the open labour market, and that's where our problem is.
Yeah, more so than Roy. You've been much involved in finance. You were Finance Limited, I think you were, you were being the director of Finance Limited, isn't it? No, financial services.
After I left the States, I was chairman of Jersey Finance Limited, which was promoting the island's name abroad, and widely abroad as far as China and the Middle East and that sort of thing.
But is that, I mean, obviously that's the driver for the growth, isn't it? It's the finance industry. Nothing else is driving growth, is it? It's finance. So is that sustainable? I mean, because obviously it makes it more and more difficult all the time for any other businesses to make a comparable income, because they can't. Nobody can compete with finance, can they?
No, but in terms of immigration, more and more local young people are studying to take jobs in the finance industry. I believe that the percentage now of local people in the finance industry is the highest it's ever been. But there is another side to it where a thing I've said before is that you come up against one of the most powerful forces there is, and that's people's ambition. And I'm talking about young people who want to start their own business and want to employ people. Doesn't matter what that business is. It can be anything from a garage to a plumber to somebody in IT. Young people, when they want to get on, want to start their own business, and they want to employ people. And this pressure to employ people is coming from within the Jersey community, and it is, I believe, one of the most powerful forces on the planet, is people's ambition. And to tell young Jersey people, no, you can't start a business, which was one of the policies, actually, of the States some years ago. People were told, no, you can't employ anybody. And it didn't come to anything, because in the end the powerful force of ambition to improve your lot and your family's lot couldn't be overcome.
Well, I went to an illuminating talk from the Institute Director John Shenton there at Scrutiny, and I was amazed at how much I agreed with the guy.
Yes, yeah.
The Institute of Directors is not my usual sympathetic bedfellow, but I found, his motivation was to make profit, whereas I would have preferred he was making social desirability, things that were socially good, but fair enough, it's a spin-off from making profit. But he was extraordinarily critical for some basic things like the educational system, how defective it is. And that's something you've been especially involved in over the years.
Yeah, I think he was right to be, because when immigration seemed to be easy and people flowed in, we didn't have to ask ourselves hard questions. Questions about why, which by the way I don't think has an easy answer, but why don't the industries like hospitality and agriculture appeal to local people? I mean, this isn't a phenomena confined to Jersey. I mean, you get the Mexicans doing all the fruit picking in California and so forth and so on. You get the East Europeans in Eastern England. So it's certainly not a Jersey phenomena, but I think they're quite right to ask those questions. And also, as Pierre said, what are the training schemes to get Jersey people into finance and to keep them there?
And John Shenton was emphatic that there should still be some form of work permit, housing control. Again, he didn't explain how those would actually affect and get the result he wanted, but he felt, obviously everybody feels, as he was saying, it's open-ended, the population is going to go 1,000 every year, where's it going to stop, how are we going to do? We're just turning over people who come in for 5 years and can't get a job until they've done their 5 years, then they can get any job. He said, what a waste of effort it all is. I mean, he was very, very perceptive about lots of things. I mean, it can't go on, can it? You can't have 1,000 a year, can it? It can't go on.
Well, the answer is no, it can't. But finding a solution to it is a lot easier than saying, no, it can't. And it's an intractable problem. It really is a very difficult one to solve.
Can you cap finance?
I suppose in theory you could, but you certainly don't want to destroy it.
No, and you feel the same? Right?
I feel the same. I mean, obviously, sort of the blue sky thinkers are saying that artificial intelligence is going to reduce the number of people in finance.
You refer to that as well?
So, in a way, it will partly resolve itself. And also, if we, and I think there are real issues. I think we've got to, and I don't like saying this, but I think we've got to be careful we're not over-optimistic about digital industries. But obviously the beauty of digital industries is that they are, in terms of population, low footprint. You bring in, a few people to set up an organisation, and it can make quite a bit of money for your society. We're yet to fully crack that, but I think that is one of the ways to go. But artificial intelligence, but where you've got big service industries, and we have, like tourism and that, you are going to use a lot of people, and you have to hope there can possibly be a culture change where the local people will be more amenable. They certainly work in things like the chef side of the hospitality industry. There's more evidence there, but we need to do a lot more work.
Pierre, you had the wonderful experience of working for an organisation at the edge of technology, the Concorde project years ago. Britain cooperating with France.
Yes.
Is the European Union, the Brexit, is that the worst thing that's ever happened?
No, I don't think so. if I had been living in the UK at the time of the referendum, I think I would have voted to remain. But now that they have voted to leave, I believe there are huge opportunities for doing business with other countries, in particular English-speaking countries like India and Canada and New Zealand and Australia. And I think the future could be very bright if trade deals are done with those countries that we used to trade with, of course.
And do you think those deals will be allowed for places like Jersey, Guernsey, Darnley, Gibraltar, and all the other bots around the world? Do you think those will get through it with a reasonable outcome?
I think that it is perfectly conceivable that they will, but it's a brave man who can even forecast what's going to happen. The whole thing is standing aside from it. I hesitate to make any firm opinions on it because you don't know, or one doesn't know, the real facts of what's going on.
Independence, Roy? Is that the ultimate objective, or is that the last possible resort?
I think it's the last possible resort because small states have to make accommodations even if they are notionally independent. You know, you see that all over the world. It's not going over the cliff edge. It can certainly be handled. If you look at small places like the Seychelles, like Malta and so forth and so on, and classic ultra success stories in a sense like Singapore, it can certainly be handled. But there's no doubt we've had a lot of very advantageous links with the UK. They did fray under the European Union because the UK felt torn between its loyalty to us and its loyalty to the European Union, obviously. But that is going to be resolved. But it will be difficult times, partly for the reasons Pierre mentioned. You know, we're going into uncharted waters, and we are, you know, there's no doubt we meet continuing hostility about the role of finance.
Which section of the community now are you still in touch with? I mean, who do you speak to?
I speak to people certainly in my old constituency.
Right.
I work on groups with the U3A, so I speak to people on those groups.
And their feeling is optimism?
Guarded optimism, I would say. I mean, I haven't. It's, to be quite honest, across the breakfast tables of Jersey, where, as you said earlier, that's where the political discussion still used to take place, I don't think Brexit has yet hit people. Although there's a special government department and people have been employed, I don't think they've broken through into public consciousness quite bluntly.
Well, as you would know, I famously ran in the senatorial by-election that came out 2 years ago on a Brexit platform. What's going to happen to Jersey after Brexit? And I think there are 60 people in Jersey who share my view, so I was somewhat short of getting
underwhelmed,
elected.
yes.
So it's not an issue then, this. And I don't see any greater awareness now. I don't see that people are that much, they think it's going to pass the island by. I mean, is that the feeling? Presumably you're still in touch with people in finance. Is that what they think is going to happen? It's going to pass the island by?
I don't know what people in finance generally think about it, but there is a comparison of Brexit to Jersey's actual position in relation to the European Union. We have a trade deal with them. We're not part of it, and it has been said, I've noticed in newspaper media, that the UK could finish up with some sort of similar situation to the one
Jersey has the deal that they want.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
They want to be like us. Now, if that was to happen, I think Jersey would be okay, because it's almost no change. But it's a strange situation when you see comment saying, well, the Channel Islands have got it right, and perhaps we should do the same.
Of course, they talk about Jersey, Guernsey, and the Isle of Man are three. They're not the same. One size doesn't fit all, I keep saying. The Isle of Man's in a somewhat different situation. Geographically, it's in a very strange situation with the Irish development with the border, because they'll have to have borders with Ireland, north and south. Mm-hmm. And if Scotland does anything weird, they've gone very quiet in Scotland if they become separate. I mean, the Isle of Man, for example, will be in a totally different position to Jersey, which has got borders with France and England. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there are all these complications about where do the borders go and who polices them. Is that an issue, do you think? Does it bother you?
No, I mean, I know that. I think more the substance of the ultimate agreement. Going back to your point, is anyone in Jersey interested? I think they're basically holding their breath while a very messy negotiations go on between Britain and the EU. And obviously they don't inspire people much at the moment because of the way these negotiations are being conducted. But the hope is, out of the fog, there will emerge an agreement. So I don't think Jersey people are as disinterested or as necessarily complacent as you're suggesting, Mike. I just think they want to see what's going to happen.
Well, the Conservative official line is here, maintain the status quo. So that is, there's no need to prepare a plan of action if you want to maintain the status quo.
I'm fairly optimistic that they will get a reasonable deal in the Brexit talks. Mrs May, I think, is doing quite well. But if you go to England, as I was recently, and every other car on the road is a German car, whether it's a Mercedes or a Volkswagen or an Audi or even a Porsche, and if there's a question of tariff barriers coming into place, you're not going to tell me that the whole German car industry is going to be jumping up and down trying to pressurise their government into not having an arrangement whereby the UK must be one of their biggest
markets.
Well, isn't it? Trade is the fundamental, isn't it? It's always got. You've got to sell to somebody. You've got to make something and sell it to somebody. So.
But the German car industry has been very quiet until recently. There was some very senior person in the car industry began to make comment last week, which shows that they're either waking up or they're now prepared to say something. But in the trade talks, there is a huge amount of trade which comes Britain into the European Union, and whether it's France or the German car industry, and they are not going to be silent. They're not going to let their leaders lead them into a situation whereby they have to pay tariffs to send their goods to the UK.
The staff here today are European Union citizens. Their situation is not certain. There are all sorts of promises being made that those that are already here will be allowed to stay and carry on as is, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee their families can come over, their relatives and dependents can come over. Does that cause you any concern?
No, I'm quite positive in my support for the fact that the people who have already located in the UK, for example, should be allowed to stay, provided UK people who've located in the European Union should be allowed to stay. I don't know. I don't think that's been quite finalised, but it looks as though that will be agreed.
Was it a bad decision, Roy, not to allow European nationals who aren't British to stand for the States here? Was that a bad decision or a good decision?
I thought it was a good decision. I think the notion that you need a certain amount of time to get to know a society and that you should take on the nationality of that society, it strikes me as reasonable.
You think I know the society?
Yes.
I've lived here for 40 years.
Yes.
Do I understand it? I can't make head or tail of it at times. Do you understand it, Pierre? Do you understand what makes this place tick?
Yes.
You do?
So what is it? Tell us.
That's a very complex question.
It is, isn't it? In political sense, there's a huge amount of dissent at the moment, public dissent, expressed in the social blogs to a large extent, but in the JP as well. Even the JP is doing editorials which it wouldn't have done 10 years ago.
No.
And there's an awful lot of senior members of the government are not standing again. Do you understand what's happening there? I mean, that's worrying, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and the answer is I don't understand, but certainly the public dismay with the States has increased markedly over the last 10 years, I would say, and I think part of it is due to the States' own inability to reorganise themselves into something that is recognisable as a proper government structure with proper elections where every election vote counts as much as another one. Having people in the States who get elected with 250 votes and other people who get elected with can't remember how many I had now, 14,000 votes.
Yes.
17 at the last election with no votes, only their nomination papers,
Yeah.
which,
That's right.
That's quite worrying, isn't
The move to the bigger constituencies I thought was actually a good move because it made everybody equal. And it also meant that there would never be elections, or unlikely to be elections, where you're elected unopposed, without a ballot. And they agreed to do that, and I thought, hooray. And then the law to achieve it arrived in the States, and they rejected it. So we're back where we started, having an election now, which should have been with the bigger electoral areas, and everybody having, every vote having the same amount of power.
The care inquiry was a huge issue. £25 million report, made all sorts of recommendations. How do you rate it now as an important issue for Jersey, the results of that inquiry?
Well, the results of that inquiry are clearly important. I don't want to be in any way critical of that inquiry. Some of the recommendations, such as demolition of Hotel Garenne, I think were way beyond their remit.
Yes.
And that really is a matter for the island to decide. But I think it was a horrible episode.
Did you attend any of the inquiry hearings?
No, I didn't.
Did you attend any? Rob?
Yes, I did.
What did you make of it? Was it well run?
It was well run. I was quite surprised at certain witnesses who weren't called. Now, some didn't live on the island, but it struck me, and there were other witnesses, and credit to them, who did sort of send in papers and did attend, and they knew by so doing they were going to self-incriminate themselves. And so I thought the report reflected this in its findings, in that if you attended and you were open and honest about your failings, you were going to get slammed. But what about the people who didn't attend and who'd had fairly fundamental responsibility for some issues? But as a report, I thought it was fundamental. I'm not sure the island has totally fallen behind it, so to speak.
Do you think the Chief Minister now, he obviously wants to pursue the report, he wants to implement as far as he can, and the first target obviously is the bailiff to be removed from the States. Now obviously, presumably you would say that was beyond their remit, they shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, absolutely beyond their remit, and I don't see that the bailiff should be removed from the States, if only because you've got to answer the question as how are you going to, or how is it going to be replaced? And it is said that the members would elect a speaker from amongst their number. Well, it's quite a difficult job. I must say.
You've done it, haven't you?
Yes, I have done it. Roy may remember.
Yes.
I have done it. And it's quite a difficult job. And it's got to be somebody who's reasonably well respected by the other members. So you're going to have to take a senior member, somebody who might be a minister, and make him a speaker. And it's questionable whether you've got enough people to be able to spare one. And then the people who elected that person then become disenfranchised because they can't act politically. So I don't think
I've always thought the greffier is the sensible.
Well, the greffier or somebody like a
because he does it now and they do it.
Or somebody like a retired lawyer. I have to say I don't agree with Pierre, it could be done. I'm not sure it's a priority with the childcare issue, quite honestly. I want to see it done, by the way.
Well, it's a sort of emblem for the Jersey way. The criticism, I had a lot of criticism of the so-called Jersey way. And the things that were neglected were because of, supposedly, institutions and practices which were saying, oh, well, we'll sort that out, don't worry about that sort of thing. And that's what the Jersey way was being got at, and the bailiff's role was seen as part of all that, I think. And the fact that he's got these various hats sort of rather encourages the view that they're doing too many jobs which they should be separate.
I totally agreed with the Carswell report, and if someone as eminent and as intrinsically or inherently conservative as Lord Carswell recommends it, it has to be serious in my view. You know, people like that don't make frivolous recommendations.
Do you think it's one of those things like constables, it will happen, the constables will not be in the States eventually, or it will happen much reduced?
It will happen, but it will take...
That's right.
It will take a lot of time.
Will it take a Home Secretary to come across it, or the equivalent, as was a tutor read? Will it take another tutor read to come across?
It might take that, or if the states were to be reconstituted along the lines Pierre outlined, and which I agree with, by the way, if they were to be reconstituted, the states might be more reform-minded. But as you know, Mike, in apropos your question earlier, what makes Jersey tick, you've really got to look at the history, say, of the 19th century, of the tremendous resistance to change, as you well know. And it takes a long time.
Yes, I mean there were some people with Jersey names, but they weren't accepted as Jersey people like that.
No, Lacroix being the classic one.
Even then it was seen as an English versus Jersey rebellion, wasn't it?
But see, on the childcare issue, I agree with Pierre to the extent that it's taking our eye off the ball by going on about the bailiff. I mean, there's a lot of hard discussion should occur about what does a good children's service look like? Where should it be placed within the range of services that the states runs? With health, with education or whatever, and how can we monitor that service? But the equally compelling issue, how can we get staff who are motivated? Because morale must be at absolute rock bottom in that service. We're running it with agency staff. What do the people who've made a career, who've come back to Jersey, what is this doing to them? We've somehow got to lift them, and we've got to make them proud of what they do, because they do an incredibly difficult job.
I've overrun this time by a few minutes. The hospital I want to raise with you, have you ever, when I first came to Jersey with old Sir Marco, they wouldn't spend a penny on anything. That was it. It was an economy which was based on no borrowing at all. Now it seems that any amount of borrowing is acceptable. Is that a scenario you can recognise with Jersey?
Not really. If you're faced with the question of having to build a new hospital, of course, and then the money has to come from somewhere, so they have decided that they will use some of the strategic reserve and they will have some borrowing.
There are all sorts of other, but they just announced this week a £45 million mental health facility. No idea what it's actually going to be. Just sort of like, 45 billion. A central office block for the states, which we can talk about for years. They've got no money for that. Schools, another £30 million for Kennedy. I mean, the money's, as they used to say, coming out of our ears, but it's not, is it?
I think what you've done there, Mike, you put your finger on the big, you started this by, I think, trying to find out what are the underlying issues. And one of the skills of a politician, which doesn't get electorally rewarded, is to think in the long term. Because obviously the temptation, which we'll see repeated many, many times in this election, is to make all sorts of short-term promises based on the availability of easy money. I think the days, even though the states may be behaving like a drunken sailor in the way it dispenses money, but the days of easy money are over. We had tremendous wealth, growing wealth after the war. And although we are continually told, the Lamarcons, the Vibits, the Krzyzewskis, they did a wonderful job, it was on a massively rising tide of never-ending revenue, as Pierre has just said. And there were reforms made, despite what you said about, they'll never borrow. I mean, there was massive reform to education, for example. Helier was built, schools were rebuilt, the intermediate was rebuilt.
Of course, the two main priorities are now supposedly education and health.
And health had its new wings and so forth and so on. There was, on the basis of a rising tide. We're not there anymore, even though we give that impression. We're not there anymore. And we have to think about what are the priorities. And it's very hard to do that in a non-party system.
Do you get a little stirring somewhere inside you saying, I wish I was standing?
No, I'm too old. I'm too old even to be a jurat, let alone a statesman.
You don't look at Pierre.
Well, maybe not, but I'm probably older than most people think, and so I've no wish to I'd like to put the clock back, but not in that sense. But not in that sense of going back into the States.
But can you agree with most of what's going on? You find you come, if you were 20 odd years in the States, you've seen it all before. It's all happened before.
Yes, I have to say that I see things happening that I think, I would not have done that. And there's quite a few of those these days, and but I'm well out of it, and I can't. I find it not right that, as an old retired member, to actively criticise the people who have replaced you and succeeded you.
But there's only a limited pool of people with political knowledge. We need your knowledge. That's what I feel. I said to Roy, I said,
but nobody
why
wants
don't you
it.
write some papers for some groups and say, look, this is the sort of whatever economic policy or social policy. I mean, you did a brilliant report of organisational care homes for scrutiny.
Yes,
I don't think anybody read it. I read it. I don't think anybody else read it. It was a brilliant report.
Yes.
Wasn't it?
Yep.
And you know, it's a fundamental problem for society. What to do about ageing population?
Well, going back to your previous question, I've been out of the States now since 2002, so that's 16 years, and over the first half of that, I used to write political letters to the JEP.
Did you?
I used to write them quite frequently, particularly on reforming the states and things like that, but as you get further and further away, you begin to think, well, it's not right to keep carping and writing, so I write less than I used to. I do the occasional one, I sort of get my pen out, but I did have a spell where I did write quite a few, I hope, constructive letters, but you can't keep telling your successors what to do.
How about you, Roy?
I would essentially agree with Pierre. I mean, it would be nice, I suppose, if we were more involved with think tanks, areas where you didn't give binding advice, but you gave advice and they could reject it or accept it, you know,
Even if
or
you're
whatever.
on as consultants on scrutiny from time to time.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. When I first left the States, I really felt that I could still make a contribution. I'd done 27 years, I'd risen up through the ranks to the top job, and I could still make a contribution of some form. And the trouble was the people in office didn't really want to hear from you. And I don't blame them. They had the responsibility, they were doing the job, but I think Roy is right. In that situation, you've still got a wealth of knowledge which is potentially wasted, and more use should be made of it.
I'm going to stop almost there, but the next election, is your prediction that it'll be a good result or a bad result?
You can't blame him.
Frankly, I have no idea. It's so difficult to call. You've got these senior people not standing, you've got newcomers coming in that you don't know anything about at this stage, and I really cannot answer that question.
How are you, Roy?
So this is getting embarrassing, but I would tend to agree with Pierre. I think because we haven't been able to promote fundamental reform in many ways, I think we're still at a rather unfortunate crossroads. And I'm not sure that the newcomers, if there is going to be a wealth of newcomers, which looks likely, I'm not sure they'll be able to get to grips with that situation and move the states forward in a new direction, because it lacks that element of reform.
I could continue much longer, but I feel sure you're other things to do. Thank you very much for your time.
No,